Welcome back to Gotcha Interact. Today we're going to be talking about a pre-release analysis looking over Emilie. We did just get her drip marketing not too long ago, and with the new version dropping, there's been a lot of speculation about what she's going to be doing, and we really just want to take a quick peek over her kit, kind of talk about some new things that might be happening over the next few versions. So first and foremost, jumping right into her kit, it seems like through everything, to give you a base analysis, it seems like she's going to be an off-field, basically like a Dendro Yae, so an off-field character who's going to be doing a lot of Dendro damage, and that's really a little bit kind of it. Now there's way more in-depth about the kit, but her ascension that she's going to be going into is crit damage. Now looking at her normal attack, her skill, and her burst, so her three talents, her normal attack isn't anything, kind of crazy. Obviously, there's no infusion, whatnot there because she is a polearm user. But looking right into her skill, she will create a Lumidosh case that deals AoE Dendro damage. The Lumidosh case fires off puffs of Pure Dew at nearby opponents at intervals, dealing Dendro damage. Now, from what we saw, at least, this had a very large radius, so this is going to be something that's going to be very nice to use because it has such a large AoE area. If nearby opponents are burning, they will give off scents at different intervals, and the Lumidosh case will collect these nearby scents, and after gathering 2 of these, it will level up itself, firing 1 extra puff of Pure Dew for every puff that would be fired off, while the damage dealt by such attacks will also be increased as well. So as it increases, as it does more attacks, and then obviously it grabs the burning effect from enemies nearby it in its AoE, then it will also be leveling itself up, doing more damage as well. One Lumidosh case created by Emilie herself can exist at any one time, and the case starts at level 1 and can go and level up to level 2. She does have an Archie as well into the Numa alignment that will be used with her skill. Now, Rift, what are you kind of seeing about this skill specifically? What kind of stands out to you at least a little bit?
Well, yeah, like you said earlier on, it's basically just a lot of damage. It's basically off-field Yae, but Dendro. And it's kind of interesting because I think that's good, but thing is, we already have something like that in a lot of the other Dendro characters. Nahida herself, Dendro main character, really good off-field Dendro application, and even the damage is, can be pretty good. Kali is the same thing. So my initial, input would be, how good does this have to be to actually become viable or to be as good as someone else like Nahida? Because after looking at everything, and we'll continue looking at the burst and some of the talents as well, but honestly, the whole question I have in my mind the whole time we talk about her is it still worth to pull a character like this when you already have a character like Nahida, even if you are a veteran? Yeah, as far as the kit goes, it's pretty basic, and I don't know if being held to burning only is going to be hurtful for her or maybe helpful down the line, because then there are things to think about, like, well, what is Natlan going to introduce? Maybe is there going to be a pyro character we get that has to do with burning and can greatly use it kind of to an extent? Because I think what a lot of people were expecting in a character like Emilie was something similar to what we see in Chevreuse. We wanted to see some kind of massive buff to the burning reaction itself and maybe increase Pyro characters' damage and Dendro characters' damage, much like Chevreuse increases Pyro and Electro. But that's just not the case, as we'll talk about with her burst and her talents. And so I don't know, it's quite interesting because she's very selfish when I guess a lot of us were expecting her to not be about personal damage, but she is.
Losing the 50-50 is the worst feeling in Genshin. And I understand, believe me. That's why whenever I have nothing left and am in the dilemma of whether or not to spend, I use LootBar. LootBar is 100% safe and only requires your Genshin UID to purchase Genesis crystals. Normally, the price for me to buy 6,480 crystals is $100, but you can see here how LootBar has reduced the price to about $85, and if you're a new user, you get an additional 5% off. The way it works is that LootBar tops up your account through the official channel with Hoyoverse. After making a purchase, you can expect to receive it in 30 minutes or less. In my case, I received mine in just about 5 minutes. Another comforting thing about LootBar is that they are trustworthy and offer 24/7 live support. Other creators like Dukaja, Jello Impact, Supera Tom, Mujin, and Tevat Times have endorsed and used this product themselves, including both Vixen and myself. Just use the link in the description to get another discount on top of the already cheaper prices at purchase. Thank you, LootBar, for sponsoring today's video, and now, let's dive in.
Now looking into her burst, first and foremost you're going to be using your burst, and then while doing so you'll be creating a level 3 Lumidosh case and destroying any existing cases that are already out. While it exists, this level 3 Lumidosh case will not gather any nearby scents even if they are burning as well. within range and dealing dendro damage to different opponents. But it will continuously cause Scented Dew to descend and attacking opponents as well within its range while dealing dendro damage. During this time, one drop of Scented Dew will descend every 0.3 seconds, and one opponent can be targeted every 0.7 seconds. When the duration ends, a level 1 Lumidosh case will be recreated. If a Lumidosh case that had already collected scents was destroyed when the burst was used, the newly created Lumidosh case will inherit the previous scents and the level of the destroyed case, which is going to be extremely nice because it doesn't necessarily throw you out of whack when you are already kind of using your skill to gather up those scents. While the burst is active as well, the skill cannot be used to create a Lumidosh case. Looking at this basically here, like Rift was talking about, looking at really what she can do, her skill, everything that she has, it seems like it's going to be quote-unquote based on burning. But as we kind of are going through this even more and more, and we'll even talk about the passives as well to really see a little bit more on what this means, it doesn't seem like you're really focusing on increasing burn damage itself, very much akin to how Chevrus doesn't increase overload damage itself, she increases characters' damage around it. Now, instead of being a little bit more supportive to other characters, Emilie is a little bit more focused on buffing herself when this obviously happens. You saw in the skill how when burning happens, the sense will go into the Lumidosh case, increasing its damage as well as increasing the mobility that it can go, and then going into higher levels. Same thing with the burst, descending a bunch of dendro damage everywhere on top of things, as well as having a high level case that will drop and do bigger amounts of damage as well from the burst. So all of these things considered, it seems like she's going to be dealing a bunch of dendro damage. But the question is, is she actually working off of burning? The artifact set we recently got with the Bond of Life set kind of throws us kind of into that direction. But she ascends into crit damage, and we'll go into her weapon in a second, but that is also a crit rate weapon. And last I checked, burning without the C2 Nahida cannot actually crit. So it seems like she's actually focusing on using burning as a way to buff herself, not necessarily buff the burn damage itself, but to buff her later damage that she'll do with straight dendro damage. Rift, looking at the passives, what could you tell us about both of these and how that could kind of change or even just further the point of how she's a little bit more focused on just doing straight dendro damage with burning as a side effect?
So looking at the first passive, this is called Lingering Fragrance. And this just states that each time it collects 2 scents, the level 2 Lumidosh case will consume scents and release Clear Dew Cologne that deals 500% of Emilie's attack as AoE dendro damage to opponents. This damage is not considered elemental skill damage. Emilie also cannot trigger this effect for 30 seconds after triggering Catalyze or Spread. Now, I do think that's pretty interesting about that talent because it's basically just limiting you to only burning. And while we know everything in her kit is pointing to burning, this passive right here goes further to be like, okay, we want to use in burning, right? But if you use her in a non-burning team, like a quicken team, you're going to get penalized for it. So not only is she niche for one thing, but they actually like make it where it's worse, right? If you go and try to use her in a quicken team, you're not going to be able to get this extra damage out of this passive as often. I mean, it's basically gating it with a 30-second timer that this won't actually happen, and you don't want that. So by only being in a burning team and not having any electro characters essentially in the team, that's how you're going to get use of this passive. So I do think that's pretty interesting. Looking at her second passive, this is called Rectification. And this just states that when a Lumidosh case created by Emilie is on the field, all party members gain 85% pyro resistance against burning damage. Now that's kind of more, in my eyes, a quality of life. It's not a buff to anything. It's not even a debuff to anything. It just means you're going to not die as quickly. And I don't know if that's the greatest thing in the world, especially for a 5-star right here, just because, like I said earlier, I think we were just looking for a lot of buffing potential in Emilie. We were looking for a rework of maybe how burning can work. Can it get buffed a lot by Emilie? And then that's just not what we got. We got a very selfish character, right? So with this passive, I was kind of a little bit let down because there's ways you can, save yourself from burning to death, right? You can use characters like Baiju. There's Yao Yao, who's very great at her job. And so, like, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on that one. But nonetheless, I think if you're doing just a burning team, it is kind of nice so that you won't burn yourself to death, because there are some instances already in the game where I have definitely burned myself to death in the Abyss when I was using like a Diluc Virgin team or something like that. Now, there is also talk about a third passive talent. This is still it's kind of just floating out there, not really sure. And honestly, all of this stuff really is subject to change because this is the first version of the speculations. But there is something floating around out there that does state that she can buff burning damage by 36%. And then she also decreases the damage basically from spread and, quicken type teams by 90%. Her personal damage for that kind of reaction, once again, it's really discouraging using that kind of team, right? So that is kind of floating out there, but do take that with a big grain of salt.
Alongside of that actual third passive talent, people were talking about it being either increasing burning damage itself, but a lot of people were talking about it increasing just Emilie's personal damage in general alongside when you actually create a burning reaction versus when you create a quicken reaction with her. So her damage is either going to extremely fall off and be very similar to her first passive where, it's really going against the catalyze and spread idea, or it's really focusing on the idea of, okay, now I'm going to get penalized even more for that quicken idea. Her damage in general is going to fall off. So there's another few ways to look at it. But the biggest thing, I think, if we're just doing a quick overview of the character, just talking in general, I think she's going to be a good character later on down the line. And what I mean by that is let's look at some previous characters that have maybe not been great at release, and then later on they've gotten a character that's been extremely helpful. First, talking about Nilou in 3.1, and then getting Nahida in 3.2. When Nilou first came out in 3.1, there was a lot of hatred almost kind of for her, and her, mid kit not doing extremely well. The Super Bloom's not, it's very difficult to proc, blah, 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 blah. A lot of issues kind of going on with her. She wasn't really that meta. And then as soon as Nahida kind of dropped, it was probably the most meta team we had at that point in time was that Nilou Super Bloom team. Another character that dropped in 3.8 was Baizhu. And nothing really against him, but for instance myself, I had skipped on Nahida while having Alhaitham, and then at that point I decided that I wanted to get Baizhu instead. I wanted a nice healer so I wouldn't have to really worry about some other things on my account, and then at that point I got Baizhu, and a lot of people were just kind of mid on Baizhu. He was a good healer and that's kind of all he did. His shields weren't that great obviously because he wasn't really built for shielding, he was more built for the healing aspect of things, and so a lot of people skipped on him as well. And then all of a sudden he got a rerun with Farina, and after doing so because of the small bits of healing and getting fanfare stacks extremely easily for Farina, as well as being a great healer on top of that, made teams with those two extremely good and helped a lot of DPSs. So alongside of both of these characters not doing too well initially, getting a character later on helping them, I think that's something that we might see in Emilie. Right now, we don't see a character that's increasing damage based off of burning or blah, 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 but it seems like that's what Emilie does. And in the future, going into the Land of Pyro, going into Natlan, it seems like we might possibly get either a Neuvillette type idea character where maybe, an extremely strong 5-star Pyro DPS instead of a Hydra DPS that is really good, maybe even the Archon themselves, that maybe just after creating a pyro reaction, boosts both reaction damage. We don't really know, and I think that in the future, we're going to get a really good pyro DPS from Natlan that's probably going to help with burning, or maybe after triggering burning, it'll increase, pyro and dendro damage bonus for all party members on the team, kind of like what Chevreuse does to a similar extent. So I don't know. There's a lot of speculation on what could happen in the future. I don't think, for instance, Emilie's an amazing pull for characters right now, in a sense. But if you're trying to look, if you're late game and you're like, I want to get this character now so that I don't have to worry about her getting a rerun alongside of, let's say, Murata, the, Pyro Archon, let's say, and then you're kind of strapped for primos because both these characters are right alongside each other and they're great together, but you can only get one, much like how Farina and Baizhu came out in 4.2 together. So that's at least my thoughts. I don't know, what about you, Rift, about looking for pull factor for her specifically?
I mean, yeah, I think as new characters come out, old characters can only get better, right? It wouldn't make sense new characters come out and then old characters somehow get worse, right? You can only upgrade, right? So like you said, going into the Land of Pyro, surely we're going to get something that Emilie can work with even better than what we have right now. I do have pretty high hopes for that. Why else would they create a character like this tied to that? I don't know. It could just be Chiori all over again. So it's hard to say, but I'm going to stay optimistic with this one just because I do personally like her design. Her weapons all about crit rate and damage, burning. There's a lot of potential, honestly, when you look at all of it. So much damage potential. We just don't have the other missing puzzle piece, I think is what it comes down to. Once again, the great point you brought up with Nilou. And one thing I did want to talk about specifically was One thing I don't like about Emilie's kit is why do they feel like they have to penalize another type of reaction? You know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't have to do that. Now, I understand it's like to really encourage using her in burning only, but did you also have to take away the other thing? Like, just for fun factor, yeah, it might have been worse because she's not, you know, she doesn't work around it, but it still would have been fun to try it, kind of a thing. Because that's like if Nilou came out on her original run, obviously she works around Bloom a lot and creating the bountiful cores. That's like them putting in there, well, her personal Hydra damage just kind of sucks. But they didn't do that. You can still go the route of a Hydra DPS with Nilou, and it's not the best thing in the world, but it still can get the job done. So that's just kind of one of my downsides to this is I don't really know why they had to do that, but once again, it's their way of discouraging using other team comps and encouraging using burning comps. But with all that said, I'm pretty excited for what Natlan has in store. I'm really at this point looking for a new character in Natlan that will help Emilie bring her back up in terms of tier list and whatnot.
Well, that's everything we've got for this video looking at the pre-release of Emilie. If you guys did like the video, go ahead and make sure to like and subscribe, as well as check out our Discord as well. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.